For me, I underestimated having kids and working.
Yeah. And you had twins. I mean,
I know.
every estimation you had probably went out the window, right? I'm Anjana, and today on Invisible Work, boy, do I have something very special lined up for you. Actually, I'm very excited about this because, well, to tell you simply, it's because I love coffee, and that is what we're going to be talking about primarily through this episode. I'm Anjana Panna, and on Invisible Work, we champion mums who do it all, and they do it with a remarkable amount of sincerity. That is what we are celebrating. On our podcast today, I have with us Ganga Prabhakar. She's a coffee grower, a connoisseur, and a cafe owner. Today, she tells us of her journey from a small coffee growing district in Karnataka and how she managed to bring that specialty cuppa to your doorstep. Hi Ganga, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Oh, it's a pleasure.
I'm so glad, as most people do, I love coffee. I can't imagine my day without it. I can imagine my day without several other things, but not coffee. You tell us, take us back to the beginning. You are from Chikmagalur,
Yes.
a popular coffee growing belt.
Yes.
Take us back to the beginning. How did you come up with the idea of setting up a coffee shop like Coffee Mechanics?
I think, sometimes most people ask us, when they come to us and, today and say, this must have been your dream to set up a coffee shop, and, was it always your dream? And I keep saying that it never was a dream. I never dreamt of having a coffee shop. That was the last part of it though. But I think like I said, we come from the coffee growing region, and it's something that goes beyond a cup of beverage. So we never think of coffee as just, a drink that you have in the morning, right? It's beyond that. So when we decided to do coffee, it was mostly from a understanding of, when we go to cafes, we're paying 200, 250 rupees per cup. But then I always see my family or the plantation people always complaining about, the prices were not right, and there was, there's a fluctuation in oil prices, and then you have the, coffee commodity prices going up and down. So it's really the sustainability part of it that really, got us thinking. To be very honest, I think both my husband and I, who run the company together, both of us were very interested in the coffee farming in itself, and not so much on the other side of it. But then we thought that, why can't we create a farm to, table brand or a story. I don't think we thought of it as, let's create a brand. I don't think it came from that perspective. So it was just let's try selling what we grow.
Mm-hmm.
And when we started doing that, we got to know that there is so much more to what we could do. From a quality perspective, Indian coffee had everything that it needed to sell as a premium or a higher quality coffee, but it just wasn't telling the story that it needed to be told.
It wasn't branded that way ever,
Correct,
right?
correct. So because the Indian market has always been focused on the volumes that we grow,
Mm-hmm.
and we are the 6th largest producers in the world, but you don't see Indian coffee anywhere, and that was my biggest dilemma. And coming from an advertising and marketing background, for me that was like, why are we not doing this?
Yeah.
So I think it was that really got us to start off, Coffee Mechanics. And very, very initially, I think if there was a little bit of a switch that really happened, because nobody understood what specialty coffee was.
Mm-hmm.
And in India, there was not, there was hardly any, I think there was 1 or 2 brands which we later found out were doing specialty coffee. And at the time, for us to, think and say that, this is, we have to do a niche kind of coffee was something that we weren't planning for. So it was something that we realized that, Indian coffees are shade grown, they have like such high, rich biodiversity, and there's so many talking points that we could really go on and on. But none of that was spoken about. So it started really from that point, and saying, we can get people to taste Indian coffees in the way, that many others are talking about. And Indian coffees, when we were trying to get access to higher quality of coffee for us to taste, we didn't find any Indian coffees anywhere else across the globe.
Right.
And that was really shocking to us.
Uh-huh.
So that's how it sort of, we said, now we have to, take it to a different. So it didn't come from, let me sell what I, what my father's growing, or my in-laws were growing. It came from a point of, let's do something more to Indian coffees. And that really happened when one of the articles, one of the very initial days, right? Because nobody knew what specialty coffee was. So one of the interviews, very first interviews that we ever had, they spoke. It was in Indian, I think, one of the publications, and it's we were on the headline of a Sunday daily, or something, and it said espresso originals. And that really, I don't think that, I'm not sure if that meant anything to the person who was writing it, but
Absolutely
it really
not.
sort of triggered a different sort of a thing in me. And I said, this is what we are. Everything that we are today is because of what coffee has been to us.
Yes.
So we have more to give back to coffee than take away from it.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's really was a turning point for me, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought I felt passionately about coffee. Clearly, you outshine me. How long has Coffee Mechanics been, open and running? And I know you started out not just as a coffee shop, but also as a roastery, right?
Right. Yes.
So does that mean you were buying beans not just you weren't getting beans only from your estates, but
Yeah.
also from other
Yeah.
growers in the area?
Correct. So, so Coffee Mechanics was, what we started doing was roasting. So we weren't trying to get to, it was supposed to be a online D2C sort of a thing, but so it started off with, technically, how do you roast coffee differently from your traditional roasting. So that was what was, and that's how we focused on the finer nuances of coffee. What terroir, how terroir made a difference, or what a certain processing made a difference, or how these microclimates or micro regions really make a difference, or what hands of a farmer can really do to bring, because you might be neighboring estates, but you can still be growing different types of you might have different outcomes altogether, or even the varietal from that point of view. Like, everyone's so they know so much about the different kinds of rice, the Sona Masuris, the Basmatis, and the many others, but nobody knows anything about coffee. So I mean, it's a niche segment, of course, but that is what we wanted to get to. So it started off with the roasting, and the outcome of that roasting, we were, so when we started, where I think the first time that we've met,
Yes.
is the tasting room. So
Right.
we wanted people to come and taste coffees and buy and brew it at home. We didn't want to be serving coffees.
Okay.
Because we are coffee people, right? We're not,
Yeah.
we're not F&B people.
Yes. Right. That's true.
Yeah. So it was really that, we wanted more and more people to understand. And when we tasted what we grew on our own plantations, when we processed it ourselves, we realized, I mean, this is on par with any international coffees,
Yeah.
or that we were having, or any other origins that we were having, and why is it not highlighted enough? So that's when we started doing a lot of digging. So our communication changed. We were trying to tell that story, and we never wanted to get to the export market instantly.
Okay.
We wanted to sell it to Indian people, because we had enough, there was enough people who had the spending power, one, and also the need to have a lot more nuanced product was something that was already there.
Right.
But the difficult part came when when you had to educate them. So that's what we started doing.
Right.
At the
And like
get-go.
I asked, do you buy coffee beans from other
Yes,
vendors as
yeah.
well?
So initially we started off with just our plantations because somebody has to give us coffee.
Yes, correct.
And trust us with their coffees.
Yeah.
So thankfully our parents and in-laws did.
Okay.
So we started off with that, and but then we slowly added on our neighboring estates, or so we wanted the representation of many plantations. So Coffee Mechanics is just not about our plantations; it's about many growers, producers, and to sort of showcase that terroir
Yeah.
selection. Now we're looking at adding more smaller holders who's not been into specialty coffee, and onboard them, so educate them on how to process that. So basically trying to get them to uh, make their farm sustainable
Yes.
a lot more.
Because I know this from personal experience, because I'm also from
Yeah.
a coffee growing region, that coffee has changed in the way it is perceived by the
Correct.
larger population, and there's so much more consumption of coffee in
Yeah, absolutely.
urban India, but that hasn't translated directly to how planters' lives are impacted positively. So it definitely is so good to hear that the focus is not just on
Yeah.
the coffee, but also where it comes from and who brings it to
Exactly.
your table.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does specialty coffee actually mean? I mean, I would say Karnataka is
Yeah.
a filter coffee consuming state, right?
Yes,
Like
yeah.
I've been having filter coffee since I was very little, even before I had an understanding of
Yeah.
coffee and how it should taste. And you get a lot of these coffee packets
Right.
over the at a department
Correct,
store.
correct, yeah.
What does specialty coffee mean? What is it that you do to make
So-
it special?
I think specialty coffee again is a very loosely used word in today's thing, right? So you were asking me, when we started, so it was 10 years back. So at the time, there were, just to give you a perspective, we were, like I said, 2 or 3 people who are trying to do specialty coffee in its true sense.
Yeah.
But now, today, I don't think we've gone beyond count, So
Yeah,
it's probably more than 200, 300 brands who are trying to, do specialty coffee, and I feel it's a very loosely used term. For us, what it really means is, the quality of the processing, the quality of the output that you get, the kind of farming, the kind of, so it's the whole works. It's not one thing or the other, and how you roast it, and what's your kind of roast, the quality of your grinds, and how you brew it. So the entire system is what is specialty coffee ultimately is. But when you get it in a pack of coffee, in a bag, it's mostly to do with a certain quality of coffee that you're referring to. So like I think if I have to give you a basic, very generic idea, it's what a half ripe banana would be to a full ripe banana would be. So when
Okay.
a coffee is harvested at its full peak
Ripeness,
ripeness, is what qualifies to pick and go into specialty coffee. So you're tasting the
Okay.
full fruit, and there's no astringencies, there's no so it's much more richer, it's much more so that's just one parameter I'm saying, but
Yeah.
there's many things like that
Like
that
that.
we account to as specialty coffee. So it's a rigorous sort of a process. So there's steps that defines
Yeah.
now artisan roasting, or how you roast the coffees. Every roaster sort of defines what's the right way to right degree of roast for a certain coffees, based on the terroir, because I think every terroir also comes with its inherent characteristics. So we analyze that and say, okay, this is very aromatic coffee, so let's do which is that's the technical part of things. So that's what a roaster defines. So then there is what a farmer or a grower defines as in the processing bit of
Right.
it. and then what a cupper or a taster sort of decides. But ultimately, it's sort of, has to be enjoyed by the end consumer, right?
It's what suits the palate of the end
Correct.
consumer.
And there is no one size fits all. So that's the wonderful thing about specialty coffee. Like you said, when one can argue, I think if you asked me 10 years back, I would have said, black coffee is specialty coffee.
Yeah.
You need to have coffee black. But that's not the case. So even with Coffee Mechanics, the way that we were roasting earlier to roasting now is completely changed, because we believe that at the end of it, taste is perspective.
Yes.
Right? So somebody might like a pizza, somebody might like a pasta or a dosa.
Yeah.
Now that's where it differs. Now, as an expert in coffee, your job is not to tell only have pizza. You need to give an option for everybody.
Yes.
So we define it as we box it into characters, and we say, okay, if you're a milk coffee drinker, have this. If you're a stronger coffee drinker, you have this. If you're a black coffee drinker, have this. If you're exploring origins, then have this. So that's really the we've sort of created that array of choice for the consumer. At the end of it, the coffee that you like is the best coffee.
Yeah, it is such a deeply personal beverage, right?
Exactly.
Because wherever you go, even if someone serves you a cup of coffee, you're still reminiscent of the coffee you had at your own home that morning.
Yes.
Because that is what gives you comfort.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it might again, it might be related to memory, especially there's a lot of people, if you say, that's something that I'm amazed by. My mother-in-law made some coffee when I was at some point, and there's somebody talking about how their grandmother used to make coffee, and that whole smell that used to
permeated through the house.
Yeah. So it's very nostalgic in that sense.
Yeah, true. Which of the three, farming, the roastery, or the cafe, is the hardest to make financially viable, and why? Because it is all parts of the same thing that you're doing.
I think after these many years also, I still believe it's, if I have to give a straightforward one-word answer, then it's undoubtedly it's the farm. Because there is nutrition management that's needed. There is, the scientific application of what plant material you're choosing, what's the, fertilizer or any of those, nutrition management that you're doing, so all of this to one side, and then still it's a perennial crop. Towards the end of the, if the weather doesn't support, or if you have one shower or one something, it could really, your entire year could be at stake. Or you could do everything right, and still you could have have a bad crop at the end of the year. So it's really, there might be a pest attack, or there might be a harsher sun year, or there might be too much rain. So it's very nature dependent in that sense. So of course, on the other side, the cafe part of it also is very, very challenging in terms of consistency. How do you, people who are, there's high attrition rates. So training, retraining, trying to get, because you're also in the business of, a premium coffee, or, in a premium, premiumized sector, premium experience. So you also are committed to your consumer to give that quality, but it's, all of it is not completely in your hands. So that is also very challenging in my opinion. So roastery is by far, according to me, is the easier bit of the thing once you scale up to a certain thing. But
it's more of a straight arrow.
There's technicalities involved there. There is, the techniques of roasting and managing the inventory. There's huge inventory costs. There is running costs. All of that is there. But it's still a lot predictable and lot stabler when as compared to the farm or or the cafe.
So, what is it then that coming from outside of the F&B industry,
Yeah.
both you and your husband Pawan,
Yeah.
what made you get into it, and what has been the steepest learning curve there?
I
Because
think,
let me also specify that you've opened 2 cafes now. You
Yes.
have Coffee Mechanics, which is
Yes.
a brand that has been around for the last 9 years at
Yes,
least,
yeah.
and you opened Kana, Bangalore,
Yes.
where you do specialty food
Yes.
from the Malnad region. Am I right?
We do quality based, it's inspired by the plantation. So
Okay.
there's fresher food, there's fresh, because mostly you have cafes that's doing, even if they're doing specialty coffee, it's heat and serve food in most cases.
Right.
So here it's more of a restaurant style food. So everything, all your sauces to every condiment is made in house.
Lovely.
So
Okay.
that's what Kana is about. Yeah.
Kana. I keep calling
Yeah.
it Kana, but it's Kana, which
Kana,
basically
yeah.
means the drying yard where the
Yes.
coffee is placed.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to that.
Yeah.
What has been the steepest learning curve in
Yeah.
this part of your business?
So I think why we got into we never wanted to be a cafe, so it was a fight within us for the longest period of time.
Mhm.
And maybe we wanted to do a cafe, which one cafe maybe,
Right.
so we weren't really thinking beyond that, because
Uh-huh.
we are again, we're not F&B people. But also what I realized at a late, but everybody who's doing this whole chain format have 100 stores, 200 stores, sort of a goal.
Mhm.
Not saying that but we felt like there is so many of them already.
Mhm.
So why do we have to be another one of the same thing?
Right.
So we wanted to do fewer, so we wanted to focus more on the coffee experience part. When I say coffee experience, it's everything that's connected to enjoying a coffee, in the most relaxed sense.
Yeah.
So that coupled with good food, good coffee, good whatever it could be, right? And we as a we felt like cafe is such a borrowed Western concept,
Mm-hmm.
and we were just replicating it for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
So we felt like we wanted to create something that's designed for the Indian audience.
Mm-hmm.
Now if as Indian audience we want to go hang out with friends, we want to eat and drink and I think it's fine. Why are we hell-bent on doing espresso bars when nobody is drinking espresso?
Yes, true.
So why are we doing bake at your central something, and we didn't want to be another bakehouse,
Right.
and coffee, because there's already plenty of them.
Yeah.
Of course it's easier to scale,
Yeah.
but what is the need to scale?
Yeah.
If you
That's an interesting idea.
yeah. So we wanted to build a space that had a lot of soul. People came back for something that's beyond coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So which is when we came up with Kana. We were not very sure if it will work or not, like I said in
Yeah.
one of our conversations earlier, because we got a lot of industry people who were experienced in crafting experiences from the more farm to table sort of an idea. We it was building a concept,
Mm-hmm.
and doing everything from scratch to design it for what our audience would like. To take local ingredients and turn it into something that's still comforting. Like say we do pastas, we do burgers, we do pizzas, all of it, which is comfort food. I also didn't want it to be very pretentious in certain sense, because it's not a fine dine that you're going to. You shouldn't really be stretching yourselves to but
Right.
why should good food or good quality food should be only limited to fine dine?
Yeah.
Because we are already talking about quality coffee. Why can quality coffee not have quality food?
Yeah.
So we wanted an environment which essentially we described as walk in your flip flops.
Yeah.
So that's just because it's premium, you don't really have to have fancy interiors, overdone interiors. I mean,
Yes.
it just needs to be something. It's a third space, we wanted to build that third space for people to come, relax, hang out, work, read a book,
Yeah.
have a meal with your family, or if it's, we're not going after millennials or Gen Zs as such. That wasn't our target audience. It was families, who wanted
Right.
to just come with your kids, hang out, have a good time. You can come with your parents, and we have like these comfort bowls that we made with local grains. We didn't want to do quinoas and whatnot, so we chose barley. And so
Yeah.
it's a very, but the technique wise, there's a barley bowl that we do which has a pumpkin in it, which is a very local
Yeah, ingredient, yeah.
ingredient. But we've done it in a Japanese style, a karaoke style of
Nice,
thing. So
okay.
it's trying to build a global sort of element to it, but it's still very local.
Right.
So there's this borrowed technique from all across. It could
Right.
be French cooking, Italian cooking, Japanese cooking, from that sense. There's pizzas that we do. There's sourdough pizzas that we do, which probably we do very close to a Neapolitan style, but we
Yeah.
don't claim anywhere that it's because we don't want to define ourselves to a certain style.
Right.
So it's a local. It's a local experience that we're trying to build.
Right.
Of course, we're borrowing a lot of techniques that we
Yeah.
can learn from, but it's still a very Indian experience.
Right.
It's designed for Indian palate.
So, what would you say you learned from owning and running a Coffee Mechanics to now a Kana?
So I think they're two different animals. But I think the most fabulous thing about consumer front is something that you see what you create, being experienced, and if people love it, hate it, whichever way it is, right? So I think that has been one of the main things that's gotten us to make everything that design everything that we do on the plantation, which is more focused on what should the consumer experience, or what is that we want to build, or is it really making a difference. So I think that is one. So we get instant feedbacks. So that's a fantastic thing about the consumer front.
Yeah.
So it's mostly the behavioral part of it, right? So, and sometimes not everybody gets the quality that we try to provide, because it's new. It's still very. I don't think majority of our audience still appreciate quality over price. But that's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's and we don't want to say it in that many words as well. We don't want a fine print to read, like, which is too exhausting, because it's a cafe space. So
Yeah.
we've kept it very casual. We've kept it very approachable. So so that's what we've gone for. So I think that way it still lets somebody. We don't want people to come and say, okay, I want to bring my cousin or my friend who's visiting me from another country. We don't want only that to happen. This should be your everyday space, so that is what it is designed for. So I think that has having that first interaction with the consumers really made we've learned a lot from that, which has helped us customize a lot of things around what we do on the other side. Now if it's not valuable for the consumer, then why are we doing it?
Yeah.
So we but there are also other things which we feel like there's a lot of noise around. And see, we're in the business of coffee for many generations now. Our families have been in this for 5-6 generations.
Correct.
And that's a huge load that you're doing. So you're carrying
Yeah.
forward. So you also don't want to do gimmicky things, because you're also catering to a smarter segment of the market.
Yeah.
The day that they find out this was all gimmick, they're going to hate you for it.
Yeah. True. True.
So that's something that we don't really we try to detach ourselves as much as possible, as much as like for experiment's sake it's fine. We've done fruit ferment, this, that, everything, but now we find that very gimmicky in
Right.
most sense.
So you're willing to let Kana be just what it is, a place where you come
Yeah.
for good food, good coffee, and
Correct.
the fluff is minimal.
Yes, yeah. So, like with Coffee Mechanics, we hyper focus on talking about coffees, the nuances of it, and everything. So, when we, sub branded Kana, it was for the thing of, we wanted people to have a good time, a good time when you come to a coffee shop.
That's it. You don't have to learn about the coffee
Learn
itself,
about coffee
but
because,
enjoy
maybe
yourself.
Coffee Mechanics is too much for them to when
It's a bit
they're
more
not
technical,
yeah,
perhaps.
a lot more technical, and we love doing it and we will continue doing it, but it's not, this is for somebody who loves engaging with that side of thing.
Yeah.
But this is for everybody.
Kana, yeah.
Kana is for everyone, your child, your thing. So it's also something that we said, what our children cannot eat
Yeah.
from the menu, we don't
Yeah.
put on the menu.
Oh,
You know,
sweet.
so because we're designing it as a a family place.
Yeah.
So I think that was the smallest thing that you could do.
Yeah. Speaking of children,
Yes.
I have to tell our listeners that Ganga here has twin girls,
Yes.
and they're just 3.
Yes.
How did you manage? I mean, with a business this demanding, with multiple verticals, how have you structured your life so that both parts of you can exist? The entrepreneur and the mom.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of I need to be thankful for my support system, really.
Right.
Be it with my mother, who's been the biggest supporter ever, or I don't think any of this would be possible. But apart from that, it's also your support staff at home, who's your nannies, your cook, and so you have to organize it. Sometimes it also doesn't make sense in the beginning. Thinking,
Right.
it's because it's expense.
Yeah.
And and then you really have to align yourself. And I don't think I'll be lying if I said today that I knew what I was doing then. But but it's just you're just taking it by the day.
Yeah.
There's no other way of doing it, I think. And but I'm also very curious how I have like such great respect for women women who are doing everything.
Right.
And I really wonder how they do it. But for me, it's really been, I take it one day at a time. Some days are mess, and some days are okay, and some days are good.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is. So my role keeps switching. It switches by the hour.
Yeah.
So
And it's kind of nice to have that inbuilt fluidity, I guess, because
Yeah.
it allows you not to get caught up on the smaller things.
yeah, but see, I think we are all built a certain way. From a inherent part, right? So
Yeah.
I'm also that person who used to be like, okay, I wake up at this time, I go to the gym at this time, and I have my breakfast at this time, I go to work at this time. So I've been that person. And like, I think if I have to my one good quality, if I have to say, it would have been discipline.
Right, okay.
So, but this defeats everything that I knew.
Baby 1 and baby 2 were like, huh? What's that?
What's that? So so you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
You're now learning everything from scratch. You're discovering yourself. You don't know it any other way.
Yeah.
And you think that having being disciplined is your biggest skill.
Yeah.
And then this is not working.
It doesn't cut it. Yeah. I mean, children have that ability to just
Yeah.
take everything you knew about your life
Yeah.
before them and shove it right out the window.
It's really been unlearning everything I knew about
Uh-huh.
myself and really discovering this new self and being open to the idea of, I mean, there's no not being open to the idea.
Yeah,
you have to be.
So now, 3 years into having had your children,
yeah.
do you find that you're trying to go back to some of those bits of you?
Yeah. I think there's some things that you miss a lot of being
About
which-
yourself.
about yourself, which you liked, and that for a brief period it's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
So you have to let go of something or the other. You
Yeah.
can't do everything.
How do you find yourself going back to that? How do you find your way back to that?
So I think it's sort of it's different for different people.
Right.
So for me, it's really been I've taken this call when I feel the time is right.
Right.
So I don't really enforce anything on myself.
Right.
Because then you're just being unforgiving yourself to yourself, which is really not fair.
Yes.
So you have to be okay with things. So I think that, and then first is to have a composed mind. A mind space where you really are in make sense of a lot of things that are happening around you. For me, I underestimated having kids and working.
Yeah. And you had twins. I mean,
I know.
Every estimation you had probably went out the window, right?
So this is something that so during my my pregnancy, there's one of the things that I kept telling my husband and my family was you're not telling, because I'm a hyperactive person in general.
Okay.
So everyone used to be. So I was very scared that everyone is going to ask me to sit a certain way, stand a certain way, and all of this. So I said, none of you guys are saying anything to me, and I worked till my 8.5 months.
Okay.
My pregnancy, and then my aunt, who's my gynac also, was like, there's nothing doing. You just need to come back now.
Yeah.
But post that, I thought, delivery means, delivering, collecting a parcel and coming back home, and your life goes on. Clearly.
Oh, naive. Right.
So it was a whole bunch of circus right after, you had 2 screaming babies and also your business that you had to go back to.
Yeah.
Because I think entrepreneurs, I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs right after that. Because there's no maternity leaves.
Yeah.
There's, you do it or you don't do it.
Yeah, you can't stop cold turkey.
Correct. Yeah. So you have to go on, because you also have a lot of people who are dependent on you. You have a lot of your employees. You're accountable for them.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more than even your kids at that point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But so you work with your husband Pawan.
Yes.
This is something both of you all birthed before your twins,
yeah.
right? So what has that been like? Running, a business with the spouse. I think a lot of people romanticize it and all of that. Is it that way?
No.
What is it like? How do you all divvy up the work and things like that?
Yeah, so I think it's very difficult. I feel it is something that it is nowhere close to romanticizing any of it, because it's not. Because you also have each other so closely. You also you cross so many lines at so many points. So and that keeps on both sides. I'm not saying
not
that
just
it's
you
not just me or not just him. It keeps happening because you don't know that line.
Yeah.
You see, if it's with a coworker, then you have that line, right?
Yeah.
You know what
Some
not to
boundaries
say.
are set.
You have your boundaries set. But this is one thing that we had to I don't think any defining helps. Now, because you keep crossing that every now and then, and you take each other for granted also at most times.
Yes.
So but thankfully, he's the patient one.
Okay.
I'm more of the the high energy one, like I said. But I think it's sometimes too much calm also is not very helpful for the business. So it's both parts.
Right.
So we there's that balance that you have to bring. So it's above us. So it's not. We disagree a lot of times about what we do for the business, but it's only contained to the business, and it's not personal. There's no ego. Neither of us are egoistic people from that point. So I think I don't mind losing, or I need a why, though a very I need to know why this is not okay. But if I have my answer, then it's fine.
Right.
So I don't want to win every thing. It's nothing to do with ego.
Yeah.
So that's one part that I think that's helped us sort of navigate it a lot more smoothly than Otherwise I wouldn't call it smooth though.
Yeah. So this is something I'm curious about now. So how long after you all got married did you all start Coffee Mechanics? Was it like a honeymoon sort of phase idea? Like, oh my God, we're so in love, let's also start a business? Or
No, I think so I've always been entrepreneurial.
Right.
I've always wanted to do something
On your own.
on my own, and and even Pavan, he's very I think he's the most intellectual person that I've ever come across
Right.
in my life. So so he's you can talk to him about anything under like I know about a certain subjects,
Right.
but he knows about everything under the sun.
How sweet.
And it's like so I'm just like why are you this encyclopedia for what?
Yes.
So I think that's how it sort of started. So when we had this whole thing of entrepreneurial thing, which we wanted to do together, we had a whole list of things like from laundromat to some from AI to like automating houses to so many different ideas on the list. And
So you'll actually bashed out a couple of ideas before you came to this?
And coffee was last, because this is like, of course we're going to do coffee because we have to do coffee.
Yeah.
Because in our heads, it's like, one, it's a given. The second, it's so easy.
Right.
Because we already know everything about it.
Of course.
But obviously not, So there was, that's when we realized, so when we started digging a little, the initial idea was, package your coffee and then sell online. Obviously, people are going to buy it.
Yeah.
But we, then we said, let's start with knowing, taking it to a local roaster, getting it roasted. Then we realized that the local roaster didn't know to roast the way the specialty coffee had to be roasted to pick out those finer nuances. So then we imported a small Taiwanese roaster, handmade roaster. We learned roasting on that before we bought our larger roaster. So
Wow, yeah.
so we were roasting out of our houses when I had just quit my job.
Okay.
And Pavan was still working. So I had to line up all of these roasts for him to come back and for both of us to try out. And then we used to stare at the wall at night and we were wondering, why are we not sleeping? So, yeah.
And now that's the downside of running a coffee business, I guess.
Correct, yeah.
You're too caffeinated.
Too caffeinated for anything you have to, so that's how it's sort of, so that's when, and I think 2 years after we got married in 2016 and
Right.
we started, 2014, and we started Coffee Mechanics in 2016.
Right. So it's so lucky that you all found each other. Both of you had the, entrepreneurial bug and you had the coffee background. That's quite cool. Okay, so what does the future look like? Not just as someone who runs an F&B, someone who's a part of the F&B industry, but also someone who's so steeped in agriculture. What does the future look like? I know on the agricultural front, things are changing so rapidly for every sort of crop, but for coffee especially, because times are changing.
Yes.
And if I went into the explanation, I feel it would be very technical.
Yeah.
But it is evolving rapidly.
Yeah.
So where do you see coffee, going from here, and vis-a-vis that your
So I think
industry?
Right from before what we when we started, the idea has always been farm first because that's a provider for everything else. So what we focus on the other side of the business also is the farm to table experience. So we're not just talking about the coffee that you're having as a cup of beverage, but we're trying to take it beyond that.
Right.
So for the future, if you ask me, for the Indian ecosystem as well, a lot of things are changing from the way we farm. So that has to change drastically, and that slowly is, from the way that we look at farming, the precision farming techniques that we'll have to adapt, and the way uh, the mechanization, part manual, so these kind of things. So all of these things are there. So future definitely is, you know, both sides. But I think our focus is going to. I mean, already we do a lot of, farm tours. We want people from the cities to come and experience what it's on the plantation. It's not, and sometimes, I've heard so many um, uh, you know clips doing the rounds that say some of the chefs saying that, coffee just needs a machine. Why is it so expensive?
Oh, right.
So so it's not about that one cup of coffee, or what is in the thing, but what is how are you procuring your coffees, and how long does it take to grow a coffee? If I go into the technicalities of that, then I think it should be more than any other dish on the menu.
Yeah.
So I'm not discounting anything else that is being grown, because
No,
I think
absolutely.
that is the depth of every ingredient,
Yeah.
right? So
And I think people who don't know the background of coffee
Yes.
forget that it's a seasonal annual crop.
correct, yeah.
And it then provides for
Correct,
the rest
correct.
of the year.
Because there's also coffee manufacturing, right? So
Right.
when we talk about roasting and things like that, so people think that people know that it's a crop, but also it's missed because of the whole industrialization of that part of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's the change that we're trying to be, and I think every step is important, as long as somebody's adding value in every step.
Yeah.
So we keep hearing about how coffee is the most traded commodity in the world after oil, which is not essentially a good thing.
Yeah.
It's just changing hands without any value add.
Yeah.
So those are the better value chains is what we are trying to build. So that's the future of coffee, is what we believe. So there is the farms, that is the farming and the farm side of things, that are very, very important. Then the roasting, because that sort of maintains what the consumer is consuming, and the cafes, and the spaces, what converts them into experiences. So all of them are equal parts, but I think all of them have their own weights to
Yeah.
sort of role to play there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you're saying I won't run out of my cup of coffee anytime soon, right?
No, not close.
All right, good. Is it important for a small business like yours?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the
Yeah.
agricultural bit. I'm
Yeah.
talking about Coffee Mechanics and Kana, to be specific. Is it important to have a plan B?
I don't think, I'm not a firm believer of plan B.
Right.
Because because I think this is, you're trying to make, now it depends on your goal. What are you trying to achieve out of this? Is it a coffee shop? Then if the coffee shop doesn't work, then you have to be doing something else.
Right.
So this is not about a coffee shop. It's not so much about it's about creating that entire ecosystem a certain way. It's about building that value chain and all of that, which takes a significant amount of time for the consumer to understand, for you to build it. So all of it. So there is no for me there is no plan B as such. I'm not saying that we won't get into doing something else also, but this is it's a it's quite a positive sort of a thing, because it's how you do it.
Right.
It's not. I mean, if you're just another coffee shop,
Yeah.
then you're competing against 100 others.
Yeah.
But we've built enough uniqueness that
Into-
people, that our consumers come to us for, and I think that's all that you need to have. So without even having to over explain yourself.
Right.
If you've understood what is important for people, and if you're catering to that, people are always going to be there. There's always, I mean, you can't be 100%.
Yeah.
You can't please everyone, but there is a market that you're trying to cater to, and if that segment is satisfied, then you have yourself covered.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I mean, I met you at a coffee event. I think it was a growers event. It was sort of like
Yeah.
the government, sponsored coffee mela.
Yeah.
I also see that you're very active on social media, where
Yes.
you and Pavan are the face of
Yes.
your brand. How important is that aspect of a business like this? Putting yourself out there, networking,
Yeah.
showing up as the face of your brand.
Yeah, see, I think when, like I said, when we started, this segment was, non-existent. So the first thing that we started doing was educating people, So for it was very important for us to talk to people, So we started off with also talking to a lot of hospitality students. We were part of many tasting sessions at certain clubs, certain premium clubs, and where there were a lot of people who are connoisseurs, wine connoisseurs, or we were part of whiskey tastings, and then we did a whiskey and coffee pairings, and we've done a lot of it, because you have to, because these all of these have similar languages that we talk, so trying to put them against something that they can compare to are very important, so you also have to understand that market as well, then if be it whiskeys, be it chocolate, be it wine, so or coffee, all of them have like similar language that you follow. So from our beers, which
Yeah.
Bangalore is
Famous for
very
beers, yeah.
popular for. So I think we took that educating part as quite seriously. So even now we have today, we have these every month. We have at least 1 or 2 workshops that we do for a group of anywhere between 10 to 20 people. Coffee sessions. So we try and most of it we do it ourselves. Now it's not so much monetarily, it doesn't give us much.
Revenue, okay.
But I think what it gives us is perspective of people are thinking, and for us to talk to people and tell them more about Indian coffees. So sometimes people are not even aware of where India's coffee is coming from, or coffee is a fruit, or coffee, how Indian coffee ecosystem works. So none of people are not aware of it. So this is one opportunity. These are things that are very important for us to have. It's more of a stimulation for people and for us.
Yeah.
So it's both ways. So that's something that we find it very valuable. So we go beyond a cup of coffee. So how is that you are brewing? And there's no one way. So we're trying to sort of also help people understand your coffee is unique to you, and let me help you understand what is the coffee you need to pick for your palate.
Okay.
So that's
And that's vital to the business, you feel? It has been?
it is important to us as individuals, because when we put out ourselves as face of Indian coffee, we want to represent Indian coffee, then it's also important to know your audience that strongly. So if you are not built for now we have clients that we send out coffees to many states. So it could be Delhi, Mumbai, Jaipur, Gujarat, and many other states, Hyderabad. So, and we've understood that all the requirement at each of these markets are very different. So you're not sending the same kind of coffees everywhere.
Yeah.
So that understanding is also something that's it's like the Indian diversity, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's chaotic, but understanding each of them is an advantage, if you
Yeah.
ask me. It's not our weakness.
Yeah.
There's so much to learn from. So and it gives us a different perspective.
Yeah.
So it's as interesting it is for us, and most people who attend the sessions love
Yeah.
it. So it's
That's
both
lovely.
ways, yeah.
Okay, before I let you go, I'm gonna ask you for a few recos, Ganga.
Sure.
Any film or show that you've watched recently, or a podcast, perhaps
Yeah.
even a book, or maybe your recommendation could be how best to brew a simple but fantastic cup of coffee at home. Whichever, you
Fine.
can pick
Yeah.
any of those.
I think I'll stick to the last part of it, because I think that's
Perfect.
so how do you brew a best cup of coffee at home? I think there's two ways that I always recommend. So one is if you have a French press, if you're lazy, then I would say go with a French press.
Right.
Because you put in your powder, you put hot water, you wait for 3.5 minutes and pour it onto your cup. That's it, you're done. But if you have a little more, and if you're able to do a little more work, then I would recommend a mocha pot.
Yeah.
So get a single or a double or how many ever people you're at home, or the most amount of brews that you're going to make in that size mocha pot, and I think that's the best. Or if you're just getting started, even a normal chani or your
Right.
strainer will
Your
do.
sieve, yeah,
So it's pretty much like the French press, but it's gonna have a bite into it, so it won't be as nuanced as you would like it to be. But if at all you want to move a little up the notch, then pour overs.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then we could go on and on.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that reco. I know I'm
Yes.
going to be trying all of them.
All of them.
Hopefully not for the rest of the day, because I think I'm already caffeinated enough. Thank you so much for talking to us, Ganga. It was truly invigorating, quite like your coffees. And Ganga has been kind enough to let us offer you, our listeners, a couple of very cool discounts. All of the details of that will be available in the show notes and also on invisiblework.mom. Discounts for Coffee Mechanics and Kana available in the show notes and on invisiblework.mom. You can find out more about Coffee Mechanics, where their outlets are, and all of these fantastic coffee sessions also on invisiblework.mom. Thank you so much for chatting with us. It was
been a pleasure.
truly special, and now all I can think of is coffee, so that's what I'm going to do. You've been listening to me, Anjana Panna, right here on Invisible Work. This is where we champion you, dear mama, so keep doing what you do.